All right, today we are going to be looking at percents. Now, percents present a lot of students with trouble because it's sort of an abstract way of thinking about fractions. So that's the way we're going to start with percents, is thinking about it as a fraction. Now, in thinking about it as a fraction, we can kind of break down the word percent to more easily understand and remember what percents actually are. So first things first is per, okay, we can think of as for every. If you've ever driven in a car, then you know that the units are measured in miles per hour. Miles per hour. So you go 50 miles for every 1 hour. But with percents, we're not doing 1 hour for every 1 hour, we're doing for every 100. Okay, so percent literally means for every 100. The way you can remember 100 is there are 100 cents in $1. Or you can remember that a century is 100 years. 100 years. Okay. So there you go. Percents for every 100. All right. Moving along. Okay. So a lot of times when you are trying to find percents, you will be asked something along the lines of this. What is 50% of 200? Okay. So in approaching a problem like this, what we want to do is we always want to find out what is the part, what is the whole. So what is the part? What is the whole? What is the percent? And then 100 is always given, okay? So percents, as we said, it's for every 100, okay? So percents are simply fractions that are always out of 100, okay? So when we have a problem like this, we want to think about what is the part and what is the whole? What is the percent? And then the percent is always out of 100, okay? So if we think about fractions, right? Fractions are parts out of wholes, okay? So in general, the word is going to be associated with the part. So is associated with the word part, or the word is associated with part. Now the word of tends to be associated with the whole, okay? This is just a general rule to help you keep track, because sometimes these problems are pretty confusing. So in this problem here, what we're given, right, is the whole, because of is right next to 200. So we know that the whole is 200. Now the word is next to what? So we actually don't know what the part is, so we'll represent that as x. And then obviously we know what the percent is because it's given here. So 50 over 100. Okay, so you should recognize this, right? This is a proportion, okay? Now, when we have proportions, there's a couple ways we can solve them. The first way here, right, is just think about it as an equivalent fraction problem, okay? So if we think about it as equivalent fraction, then we say, okay, so 100 times what? Okay, is going to give you 200. Well, easy enough, right? 100 times 2 gives you 200. So if you remember, whatever you do to the bottom of a fraction, you also have to do the top of the fraction. So we're going to also multiply this by 2. Okay, so then we know that x is equal to 100. Okay, so the answer to our problem, what is 50% of 200? It is 100. Okay. Now you probably also noticed that 50% is simply taking half of 200. Okay, and we'll get into this later, but 50% is one of our magic percents because it's sort of easy to keep track of. It's just half of 200. All right. Now moving along to something that might be a little bit trickier, okay? So again, we might have weird wordings that we need to keep track of. So let's try 80 is what percent? 80 is what percent of 320? Okay. So let's think about this for a second. And if you want to pause the video and give it a try on your own, go for it. But I will work through it here in a second. So 80 is what percent of 320? Okay. So let's think about this for a second. So the word is next to 80. So that means 80 is going to be our part. Okay. So that means we have 80 is our part. Okay. Because remember, we have part over whole is equal to percent over 100. Okay, so 80 is our part over, and then we have of 320. Okay, so that means we know that 320 is going to be our whole. Okay, so 80 over 320, and then we equal to, and we don't see a percent here, so x is going to be where our percent goes. Okay. Now, if you look here, we can't do an easy equivalent fraction problem, right? Because 100 doesn't easily go into 320. Now, we could reduce and do this, but that gets a little tricky. So really, what we want to do is cross multiply. Okay? So when we cross multiply, you may remember, what we do is we do like this. Okay? So we now have 320x is equal to 80 times 100. Okay? All we did was multiply across. Okay? Now this simplifies to 320x is equal to, and then we do 80 times 100. Anytime we multiply something by 100, we just add 2 zeros because there are 2 zeros on 100. So this becomes 80 with 2 zeros stacked on. Okay? So we have 8,000. Okay, so 8,000 is equal to 320x, and then we divide by 320. Okay, and we get x is equal to 25. Okay, and this is giving us a percent, so that means our answer is 25%. 25%. Now, when we do these problems, right, we have some big numbers here, okay? So one way we can make this a little bit easier on ourselves is to reduce before we solve things, So what we can do here is before we cross multiply, right, we can actually just go ahead and reduce this fraction over here. Okay, now an easy way to reduce a fraction when we have zeros is we can always take away zeros. Okay, now you can only take away the same amount of zeros from each one, right? So the first thing we could do is say, okay, this is 8 over 32. Easy enough. All right, so let's go ahead and rewrite that over here. So we have 8 over 32. Now you're probably thinking, okay, we can keep reducing this, right? So what is a number that goes into 8 and 32? Well, actually 8 goes into 32. All right. So we can divide top and bottom by 8. Right. And so we get 1/4. 1/4. Okay. So 1/4 is kind of our new fraction that we're dealing with. Okay. So now we have a new problem that is 1/4 is equal to x over 100. Now our cross multiplying becomes a lot easier. All right. Now we have 4x is equal to 100 because we just did 100 times 1. Okay. So we just divide by 4, and x is equal to 25. Okay. So that's a little bit easier for some people to just go ahead and reduce first. Okay, so there we go. 80 is what percent of 320? Okay, now the next setup we might see is something like this. 15% of 180 is what? Okay. Now, if we have 15% of 180 is what? Okay. So we're clearly given our percent. Now remember, we want our part over our whole is equal to percent over 100, right? Okay. So we're clearly given our percent, right? And then we see that the word of is next to 180. So that means we know 180 is our whole. 180 is our whole. And then the word is next to what, so that means our unknown, our x, is the part. And then, like I said, we know that 15 over 100. Okay, so now, there we go. We're ready to cross multiply. Now, before we cross multiply, we can reduce this, right? So we know that 5 goes into both of these, right? So let's just go ahead and reduce this and divide both by 5, okay? And if we do the same to the top and the bottom, we are left with what? 3 over 20, okay? So we have x, our new problem, x over 180 is equal to 3 over 20, okay? Now we're ready to do some bit easier cross multiplication, okay? So if we cross multiply, we have 20x is equal to, and then we do 180 times 3, okay? So if we do 180 times 3, right, what are we going to get? Let's do that over here. So if we have 180 times 3, okay? 3 times 0 is 0, 8 times 3 is 24, so we get 540, okay? So we have 20x is equal to 540, and then we divide by 20, okay? Divide by 20, okay? And then, like we said before, we can always tack off our zeros, right? So 54 divided by 2 is 27, so 540 divided by 20 is just going to be 27, okay? So our answer is 27, okay? So 15% of 180 is 27, all right? Now, one more type of setup you might see is something like this. 30% of what is 81? Is 81. So 30% of what is 81? Okay, so let's think about what we're given. Right? So the of is next to the what, and then the is next to the 81. So that means that we do not know. Again, we have part out of whole is equal to percent over 100. So our whole is missing, right? Because the of is next to the what. The of is next to the what. So that's missing. The is next to the 81. So we have 81 over x. And then, of course, we're given our percent is equal to 30% over, we don't actually need to write our percent there. Just say 30. It's sort of a given. 30 over 100. Okay. Now, again, we can reduce this fraction over here. We can tack off our zeros, right? Always the easiest way to reduce fractions from the get-go, right? So we can say 81 over x is equal to 3 over 10. Okay. Now we're going to cross multiply. And so we get 3x. I'll move this over here. So we get 3x is equal to 81 times 10. Okay. Any number times 10, you just add a 0 on because there's 1 0 in 10. So we have 3x is equal to 810. So then we divide by 3, and we get x is equal to 270. So that is our answer to 30% of 270 is 81. Okay. Easy enough. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so let's try a few on your own. Okay, so the first one is going to be 4 is 25% of what? Of what? Okay, so take a few seconds, pause the video, and try that on your own. Okay, so hopefully you tried it on your own. So now I'm going to walk you through it. All right, so if we say, again, we say 4 is 25% of what? The is next to the 4. Okay, so that's going to be our part. So we have 4 over, and then of course the of is next to the what, so that is going to be our whole. What is going to be x. So 4 over x, and then we have 25 over 100. Okay. Now we could reduce this, all right, if you want. And then if you do, you get 4 over x is equal to, now if we divide top and bottom by 5, right, we get 5 over 20. And we can actually keep going, right? So what we can divide again by 5. And then we get 1/4. That's sort of that is a magic percent. We'll get into our magic percents later. 25% is somewhat of a magic percent because it's just 1/4, so it's easy to remember. So we say 4 over x is equal to 1 over 4. Now we could do equivalent fractions here and say, okay, 1 times 4, 4 times 4 is 16, but we can also cross multiply and we just get x, because 1 times x is just x, and then 4 times 4 is 16. So that is our answer, 16. All right. One more problem, or actually 2 more problems. So try this one on your own. So this next problem is what percent of 50 is 7? All right, so pause the video and try that on your own. What percent of 50 is 7? Okay, so hopefully you tried that on your own. Let's break this down a little bit here, okay? So clearly we are not given our percent, okay? So then it's left to us to say, okay, what is the part and what is the whole, okay? So of is next to 50, so we know that that's our whole. So 50 is going to be on the bottom of our fraction, okay? And then we have is next to the 7, so that means that our part is going to be 7. Okay, so we have 7 over 50 is equal to x, because remember our what is next to our percent, so that is not given. We don't know what that is. So x over percents are always out of 100. X over 100. Okay, now let's cross multiply. Okay, there's not really an easy way to reduce there, so we're just going to go ahead and cross multiply. And so we get 50x is equal to 7 times 100, because we cross multiply. 7 times 100, anytime you multiply by 100, you just tack on 2 zeros, right? So we get 50x is equal to 700. Okay, then we divide by 50, So what do we get there? 700 divided by 50, and we are going to get 14. Okay? 14%, because we're looking for a percent there. All right, so 14% of 50 is 7. All right, good work there. And then last one to do on your own here is going to be what is 80% of 40? Okay, what is 80% of 40? Okay, so pause the video and try that on your own. Okay. Okay, so hopefully you tried that on your own. So let's find out what is 80% of 40. Okay, so clearly we're given our percent. Okay, and then the is next to what? So that means we don't know our part. Okay, the of is next to 40, so we do know our whole. Our whole is 40. And then we have our percent here, which is always out of 100. So we have x over 40 is equal to 80 out of 100, okay? Now, of course, we can quickly reduce this if we want, okay? And this is just ways to do it mentally. It's not necessarily fully reduced, right? We can just say, okay, 8 over 10. Makes our lives a little bit easier. We can keep going. Obviously, we can divide by 2, right? But let's just leave it for now because sometimes it's easier just to kind of quickly do it in your head. So we have 10x is equal to 40 times 8. Okay, so that leaves us with 10x is equal to, now let's do 4 times 8, right, is 32. And then we just tack a 0 on because there's a 0 right there. All right, so then we have 10x is equal to 320. Okay, divide by 10. Divide by 10. X is equal to 32. Is equal to 32. And that's our answer. Okay. So what is 80% of 40? 32 is 80% of 40. All right. Great job. So now you can solve these somewhat tricky word problems for percents. All right. What we're going to be going over the rest of this video is ways to do quick mental percents without necessarily having to do cross multiplication, okay? So the first thing we want to talk about here is what I like to call our magic percents. Our magic percents. Okay. Now, what I mean by this, okay, is that basically there are certain percents that are very easy to find, okay, that will allow us to find other more difficult percents by breaking those percents down, okay? Now, the first magic percent, okay, is going to be 50%, 50%. We've already talked about this some, so we're just gonna review it here, okay? 50% is the same as just finding half of a number, half of the whole, okay? Okay, an example of this, okay, would be, okay, an example would be 50% of 40, okay, and so half of 40 equals 20. So that means 50% of 40 is 20, all right? Our next magic percent is 10%, 10%, okay? So 10%, you just move the decimal place, okay? Move decimal place once. Okay, 1 to the left. Okay, move decimal 1 to the left. All right, so a quick example of this would be, what is 10% of, let's see, 10% of 340. Okay, so you take 340, move your decimal 1 to the left, okay? And so that's going to equal 34.0, which is simply 34. Okay? So you just move it 1 to the left. Our third magic percent is going to be 5%, okay? And it's sort of interrelated to what we just did because you take 10% of a number, okay? And then cut it in half. 10% in half, okay? So if we build on the example we just did, we can quickly find what can quickly find what 5% of 340 is. Okay, because we already know that 10%, okay, is equal to 34. So then you just find half of 34. Half of 34, okay, which is going to be 17. Okay, so that means 5% of 340 is 17. We just move it once to the left to get 10%, and then we cut that in half, which is 17. All right, and then we'll be doing a lot of practice with this. I know this is kind of fast, but if you're not getting it now, we'll do lots more practice. So now we have our last magic percent, which is 1%. 1%, okay? This one is similar to 10%, except we move the decimal. Twice to the left. Twice to the left. Okay? So if we want to do a quick example here, and we want to find out what 1% of, let's see, 1% of 276, right? We just take 276, put our decimal place twice to the left, okay? So our answer is going to be 2.76. So 1% of 276 is just 2.76. Okay, so using these four rules, okay, 50%, 10%, 5%, 1%, we can solve really any percent problem that we want mentally, just by hand, right, rather than using a calculator. All right, so let's try some examples. Okay. So first example we're going to do is 30% of 22. Okay, so what is 30% of 22? All right, so the way we're going to do this is we are going to break this down into parts, okay? So the first part we have is 10% of 22. Okay. Now, we said we just move the decimal place once to the left. Okay. So we take our decimal, 22, move it once to the left. And so 10% is just going to be 2.2. All right. And then we want to say, okay, 30% is just equal to 10% plus 10% plus 10%, or 10% times 3. It's just 3 10%. And so that's also going to be equal to 2.2, okay, because that's 10%, plus 2.2 plus 2.2. Okay, 2.2 plus 2.2 plus 2.2 is just 6.6. Okay, so all we needed was 10%, okay, and then we found out what 30%. There's 30% of 22 is 6.6. All right, now let's do another example here. So let's do 15%. 15% of 50. Okay. All right. Again, let's break this down. So we have, okay, 10% again of 50. Now we just move it once to the left. Okay. So 50, move it once to the left. So that's just equal to 5. We just take off a 0 because it's 5.0, but then we don't need to worry about the 0.0. Okay. So 10% of 50 is 5. Now we also do 5% of 50. Okay. Now, again, we know that 10% of 50 is 5. So we do half of 5 is equal to 2.5. All right. And then we have, okay, we have 10% plus 5% is equal to 15%. So that means we can say 5 plus 2.5 is equal to 7.5. Okay, so 15% of 50 is 7.5. All right, so we just did 10% and 5%, and we are good. All right, moving right along. So now let's do 16% of 50. All right. Now the reason we're using 50 is because I basically want to build off what we just did, right? So we knew that if we just want to kind of redo what we did real quick, right? We knew that 15% was what, 7.5, right? Now we did that by finding 10%, which was 5, okay? And then we did 5%, which was 2.5. So that was 7.5, okay? So that's how we got 15%. And then we can say 1%, okay, of 7.5. Now remember, we just take, 1% of 50, okay? 1% of 50. And now we just take 50 and move our decimal place 2 to the left. So it's equal to 0.5. Okay. So then we take 15% plus 1%, which is just 7.5 plus 0.5. So that's going to give us 8 as our answer. Okay. So 16% of 50 is 8. So we just we do what we did before, which was 10%, okay, plus 5%, which gave us 15%, and then we did plus 1 more percent to give us 16, okay, 15, that equals 16%, okay, so that gives us 8, right? Okay, one more example here. We've got 55%. 55% of 24. Okay, so if you want to try this one on your own, go for it. So 55% of 24. Let's break it down. First things first is we can use our magic 50%, okay, of 24. Now that's half of 24, which is equal to 12. And then we can say 5% of 24, okay? Now remember, to do this, we get 10%, so that's gonna be 24, move 1 to the left, so that's gonna be 2.4, okay? And then we find half of that, which is 1.2, all right? And then we say, okay, 50% plus 5% is equal to 55%. And then, so that's going to be 50%, we know is 12, plus 5%, which we know is 1.2, okay? And 12 plus 1.2 is 13.2. So 55% of 24 is 13.2, 13.2. Okay, moving right along. All right, so let's try a few on your own. So let's do 32% of 150. Okay, so go ahead and pause the video and try to solve this one on your own. All right, so hopefully you tried to solve it on your own. Now let's break it down. Okay, so first things first is we say, okay, 10% of 150. Okay, so we take 150, move our decimal place once to the left, so it's 15. So it's 15. Okay, now if we have 30%, okay, so that means 30%, it's just going to be this times 3, right? So 30% of 150 is equal to 15 times 3, okay, which is just 45. Okay, so we know that 30% is 45. All right, now we need to find 1% of 150. Okay, now we know that 150, move it twice to the left, so that is 1.5. Okay, and then 2% of 150 is going to be 1.5 times 2, right? So just take 2 of them, that's 3. Okay, so now we know that 30% plus 2% is to equal 32%. Okay, now we said 30% was 45, plus 2% is 3. So that means our answer is 48. 48. So 32% of 150 is 48. All right, great work. Okay, another one to try on your own. 26% of 330. So try that one on your own. 26% of 330. Okay, so now let's work through this. 10% of 330, okay, is equal to 330 with your decimal place moved once. All right, so that gives us 33. All right, so that means 20% of 330 is equal to 33 times 2, which is just 66. Okay. Now we want to find 5% of 330. Okay. Which we already found out what 10% is, right? Which was 33. So we just take half of 33. Okay. And then half of 33 is going to be so if we take half of 30, that's going to be 15. And then we take half of 3, it's going to be 1.5. So half of 33 is going to be 16.5. Okay. So 5% of 330 is 16.5. And then finally we need to do 1% of 330. Okay. So 1% of 330, we just take 330, move our decimal place twice to the left. Okay, so that's going to be 3.3. All right, now it's getting a little complicated, I know, but let's put this back together. All right, so we have 20% plus 5% plus 1% is equal to 26%. So now that means we know that 20% is 66 plus 5%, right, is 16.5 plus 1% is 3.3. Okay, so if we put all of that together, we get 85.8. 85.8. All right, so 26% of 330 is 85.8. Okay. One last example here. And with this last example, I'm going to show you a little trick that you can do with your calculator, solve percents if you're able to use your calculator. But we'll get to that at the end. So 72% of 180. Okay, so 72% of 180. Now take a second and try to do this on your own and try to work it out. Okay, so hopefully you gave that a try. Now let's break it down. Okay, so we want to start with our biggest percent, biggest special percent, right? So first things first is we're going to find out what 50% of 180 is. Okay, so that would just be half of 180, okay, which is just 90. All right. And then we need to find out what 10% of 180 is. Now we're going to take 180, move our decimal place once to the left. So that's going to be 18. So that means 20% of 180 is going to be 18 times 2. Okay, 18 times 2, which is just 36. Okay. So we know what 20% is, we know what 50% is. That leaves what? We need 1% of 180. Okay. So that means we take 180 and move it twice to the left. So that's going to be 1.8. Okay. So that means 2% of 180 is 1.8 times 2. Okay. So that's 3.6. You can kind of see the connection there, right? So again, bringing it all together, we know that 50% plus 20% plus 2% is equal to 72%. So that means we can simply say that 50%, which we know is 90, plus, okay, 90, plus 20%, which we said was 36, plus 2%, which we said was 3.6. So that gives us a final answer of 129.6. 129.6. Okay, so that's our answer. 72% of 180 is 129.6. Right? So we found 50%, we found 20%, we found 2%. Okay? Using our magic percents, right? We only have to know 50, 10, and 1. Really, you can do all of it with 10 and 1, but it's easier to know 50 because it kind of speeds things up a little bit. All right, so last thing is we're going to kind of go back and look at some of these that we just did, right? And I'm going to show you a quick trick that if you are allowed to use your calculator, okay? So this is what we would think of as the percent calculator trick. Okay, so the trick that we can use with our calculator, okay, is you can just multiply by the decimal form of a percent, okay? So if we look back at the problem that we did a few minutes ago, all right, we can say 32% of 150, okay? All right, now what we need to do here is we need to convert to a decimal, okay? Convert to a decimal, all right? So when we convert to a decimal, all we do is we take 32%, okay? And we move it twice to the left, okay? Twice to the left. That's the way we convert to a decimal. So 32% in decimal form is going to be 0.32, okay? So first thing is we convert it to a decimal, okay? And our second step is we just take that decimal, 0.32, and we multiply it by our whole number, okay? So 0.32 times 150, okay? If you just type that into your calculator, I mean, you could work it out, but it depends on how comfortable you are multiplying decimals. But if we just multiply it on our calculator, we're gonna get 48 as our answer. And that is our answer, okay? So we can do this with all of the problems we just did, okay? Now this is of course only if you're allowed to use your calculator, but if you are, this is a very helpful trick to have. So if we find 26% of 330, okay? So I know you already know the answer to this from the last section, but I want you to solve this out. 26% of 330. So take a second and try to solve this out using your calculator. Okay? So what you should have done is first step was convert to a decimal. So we have 26%. Okay, move it twice to the left. So that's going to equal 0.26. And then our second step was to multiply that, 0.26 times 330. Okay. And that gives us 85.8. 85.8. Okay. And then finally, let's do the problem, the last problem you did on your end. So 72% of 180. Okay. So I want you to try to work that out using your calculator. All right, so hopefully you worked it out. And so we're going to say, okay, 72%. First thing is we need to convert to a decimal. So we have 72%. We move it twice to the left. Okay, so that equals 0.72. And then our second step is to multiply that by 180, which is our whole. Okay. So 0.72 times 180 should give you, on your calculator, 129.6. And that's your answer.